My name is Claire Galloway-Weber, and I was in charge of a lot of the archiving of the Rosa Ponselle collection here at the Arthur Friedheim Library, and I'm also adjunct faculty at the Peabody Conservatory. Rosa Ponselle was one of the prime sopranos of her time, which was the early 1900s, although she actually did not have her start in opera, which is what she's well known for today. She started out in vaudeville with her sister Carmela. During Rosa Poncelle's 19 years at the Met, they would go on tour around the country. And so one of the stops on their tour was Baltimore. And while she was performing in Baltimore, she met the son of the mayor at the time, and they started a love affair. They actually went out to California for a while and then decided to come back, and he was busy with his political campaigns and his other pursuits, and she ended up getting involved with the Baltimore Lyric Opera and started to take over as the artistic director and really started the careers of a lot of local singers and continued on for many, many, many years and even hosted private concerts at her estate here, Villa Pace. So Rosa's roots were in Italy and from Italy. In fact, her original last name was Ponzillo, which her sister then changed when they were starting to enter the operatic world because it sounded classier. So when she moved to Baltimore and knew that she and her husband would be creating their home here, she decided to build an estate that was in the style of the Italian architecture and named it a villa. And then she named it Villa Pace after the famous aria Pace, Pace mio Dio from Verdi's La Forza del Destino, which was her first aria that she sang for her Metropolitan Opera audition. So the Rosa Ponselle collection came to the Peabody Library in, I believe, 2015 from Lester DeCane, who was a massive fan of Rosa Ponselle and over the years had collected many of her belongings, photos, recordings, paintings, and ended up combining it with one of the museums up in Meriden, Connecticut, which was her hometown. And as he was sort of nearing the end of his life and career, he wanted to make sure that it was in the best hands possible, and especially wanted it to be in Baltimore since it was such an important part of her life. So that's how we came across it, and he kept incredible records, so my archiving job was quite easy. I think it's incredibly important to keep Rosa Poncelle's memory alive because it could be very easy to lose her in the mix. She was at the very beginning of recording technology, and so we only have a very few good recordings, good quality recordings to capture her full power of her voice. And especially because she was so instrumental in the Baltimore operatic history and the development of the opera company here and the starting of many careers, including James Morris, who was a Baltimore local. It's really special that it's housed here at the Peabody Conservatory so that current students and people who are music fans in the Baltimore area can experience her life and her story. So in processing the collection, I spent a lot of my time going through and just making sure we knew what each of the photos and the records and the objects were. And as I mentioned, Lester DeCane took incredibly detailed notes with some very colorful descriptions. So my job was easy and really, really fun as well. I have to say, one of my favorite things about Rosa Ponselle was learning about what an animal person she was, because I am also an animal fan, but to the point where she had just a drove of dogs that would follow her around her estate in Villa Pace. And I remember coming across, I believe it was a Maryland magazine or maybe a Baltimore magazine, and on the cover she's feeding a baby squirrel, and I remember just chuckling heartily at that. Yeah, preparing the web exhibit was really exciting because not everyone can come to the archives here. And as I mentioned, Rosa Poncelle's story could easily get kind of lost in the mix, especially with larger names like Maria Callas out there. So having something that people can visit from their homes, no matter where they are in the world, was really exciting. And it also allowed me to tell a little bit more of her story and bring some of my favorite objects to that web exhibit. So as a soprano myself, it was very interesting learning about Rosa's journey, especially knowing that she came from more of a vaudeville background. It taught me a lot about what vaudeville actually was back then. It wasn't these sort of cabaret pop songs necessarily. It was Each of the artists would make their own arrangements of popular songs or operatic songs. So she created her own arrangements and was a fabulous pianist. So I learned a lot about the flexibility of what artistry really is. And I also learned a lot about the different beliefs about your voice type at the time, at the change of the century, where it wasn't as boxed in, that if you were such and such type of soprano, you could only sing Carmen or whatever it was. And that really spoke to me, having started as a mezzo-soprano at Peabody and then switching later to a soprano. It gave me a lot of hope. It's been a real joy to incorporate the Pancel exhibit into my teaching here. I am a diction professor, so teaching singers how to sing in different languages. And especially in the Italian diction class, it's been really fun to incorporate the music that she sang and also bring students to use her own piano that she had at Villa Pace, especially because one of her specialties and some of the roots of her family were the Neapolitan dialect and the Neapolitan songs, which was also one of her connections with Enrico Caruso. So I always introduce them now to the Neapolitan songs, and we talk about the dialect and we listen to her recordings. And then for them to get to sing some of those with her own piano is just a really special experience. So in October of 2018, we were able to put on a performance with Baltimore Musicals as a combined effort with the Arthur Friedheim Library and the George Peabody Library to present a lot of the repertoire that Rosa Ponselle herself sang using her gorgeous piano in the beautiful Peabody Library space. And it was something that I had talked a lot about with both Matthew Testa here at Arthur Friedheim Library and Thea Tallman Moore, who's the director at Baltimore Musicals, because I had spent much of my 2 years preceding that, maybe 3 years preceding that, researching Rosa Ponselle and just delving into all of the fabulous music. So we wanted to celebrate that local artistry and that sort of legacy that she's left behind. And it was just a fantastic possibility to do that and to bring people into the exhibit here at the Arthur Friedheim Library to see her collection. So on that concert, I had the joy of performing a Neapolitan song that she made famous called A Vu Ch'ella. And then I also performed an excerpt from Carmen, which was her last role as a Metropolitan Opera soprano. So this is after a performance of Manon Lescaut at the Baltimore Civic Opera, as it was then called, in 1969. And this is Rosa Ponselle giving a bow as artistic director. So this is Rosa Ponselle in La Vestale, which is the only opera that she actually ever performed in Italy herself. This is one of Rosa Poncelle's costumes as Carmen. This was for the sort of toreador scene in the final act before she meets her death. And this was recently on display at the Metropolitan Opera. So this is Rosa Ponselle returning from a trip to Europe in which she actually met Giacomo Puccini, who gave her a live fox, which is hard to distinguish from her mink stole, but it is actually in this photo. So these are some tarot cards that she would have used as a prop or perhaps as a practice instrument when she was preparing for the role of Carmen. So it's just saying that this was Carmela Pancel's tambourine. So this was her older sister, and it says the years, 1930 to 1954, I believe. So this is a display case here on the first floor of the Arthur Friedheim Library that includes a lot of little mementos of hers, including some of her props and costume pieces from La Traviata, La Forza del Destino, and of course Carmen. So La Forza del Destino would have been her premiere at the Metropolitan Opera, and she sang across from Enrico Caruso, and it was also the premiere of the opera in the United States. And then Carmen, of course, was her last role at the Metropolitan Opera, capping off her 19 years there. And then this was one of her more famous portraits that was done in a studio and went out on all kinds of postcards and other things like that. And this is a painting of that portrait, which was called the Madonna Portrait.